The White Pine Range didn't have roads the way the lowlands did. It had scars. Goat trails cut into shale, narrow ledges that pretended to be paths, and old avalanche chutes where the trees grew back crooked, as if they still remembered being torn down. Elara knew them all, not because she loved the mountain, either. Love was too soft a word for a place that could freeze your eyelashes shut and swallow sound whole. But she understood it, the way you understood a knife you used every day. Respecting the blade didn't mean it wouldn't cut you. It just meant you learned which edge to hold. Her cabin sat above the tree line, tucked into a fold of rock where wind couldn't hit it straight on. Most days, the world around it was a stretch of white and dark green pine, the sky enormous and indifferent. The loneliness was almost physical, an extra layer of weight that pressed down on her shoulders when she stepped outside. Some people would have broken under that kind of quiet. Elara had broken under louder things. In the valley packs, there were always voices, orders, whispered jokes that stopped when she entered the room. The constant awareness of where she stood. Never too close to an alpha, never too far from where she could be summoned. Always available, always less. Omega. It didn't matter that she could outwork most of them. Didn't matter that she could heal a sprained paw faster than their prize pack medic, or that she could track in mud where their hunters got lost. The word sat on her like a brand. It told everyone what they were allowed to do to her, and what she wasn't allowed to refuse. So one winter, when the pack finally made her choose between obeying and disappearing, Elara chose the only kind of freedom an Omega could take without permission. She left. The first year on the mountain had been a war against hunger and frost. The second year had been a truce. By the third, she knew which slopes held rabbits even in deep snow, which trees bled resin thick enough to seal cracks in her roof, which herbs stayed potent after the first hard freeze. On the morning everything changed. Elara woke before dawn because the stove had gone out. She lay still for a moment in the cold dark, listening to the cabin settle, with popping softly, wind nudging the shutters. Her blanket smelled faintly of smoke and pine needles, and the soap she made from rendered fat. She could have stayed under the covers until the thin sunlight returned, but comfort was a debt the mountain collected with interest. Elara swung her legs out of bed, shoved her feet into boots, and fed the stove with the last of her split kindling. Flames caught reluctantly, then brightened. Warmth bled into the room, like a promise. She ate a heel of hard bread and a strip of dried venison, chewing slowly while she planned the day. The roof needed checking after last night's gusts. The snares on the east ridge had to be reset. Her water barrels would need refilling before the next freeze made the stream hard to break through. And she needed fur resin. Resin was a mountain's gift. Sealing cracks, waterproofing cloth, even setting small wounds when mixed right with crushed yarrow. Elara had a tree marked half an hour from the cabin, its bark scarred in neat lines from her careful harvests. She wrapped herself in layers, pulled her gloves on, and stepped outside. The world greeted her with that particular clean violence of winter air. Her lungs tightened around the first breath. Snow crunched beneath her boots, sharp and satisfying. The sky was pale, not quite blue, and the pine tops swayed slowly, like giant dark hands. Elara walked with her head down against the wind, following a route she could have traced blindfolded. She moved through the trees where the drifts were shallower, pausing occasionally to scan for fresh tracks. There were always tracks. Deer, sometimes long-legged and wary, rabbit prints like scattered punctuation, the heavy stamp of a solitary elk, and, once in a while, the wider prints of wolves, strays, or mountain packs passing through. Elara avoided the wolves whenever she could, not because she feared teeth. She feared hierarchy. A wolf pack was never just a pack. It was a structure, a system of yours and mine, of who got to speak and who got to bow their head. And Elara had bowed enough for a lifetime. She reached the resin tree and knelt, pulling a small knife from her belt. The trunk was thick and sturdy, its lower branches stripped by past storms. Elara cut shallow slits in the bark where sap would pool, then set a small tin cup to catch it. She worked with practiced gentleness. Take too much and the tree weakened. Take too little and the trip wasn't worth the cold. The wind changed while she worked. Not stronger, different. It shifted downhill, bringing the scent of something unfamiliar. Not smoke, not prey. Something metallic. Ilara's fingers paused. Blood? She stood slowly, senses sharpening away they always did when something didn't match the mountain's routine. She listened. At first there was only the wind and the distant creak of snow-laden branches. Then, under it, so faint she almost mistook it for imagination, a sound, not a howl, a whimper. Ilara turned her head, aligning her hearing with the direction. The sound came again, sharper now with desperation, then cut off abruptly as if the speaker didn't have breath to waste. Her heart thudded once hard. Everything in her body argued at once. Don't go. It's a trap. It's none of your business. Something is dying. Ilara had learned caution the brutal way. She had learned that helping sometimes cost you more than it saved. She had learned that a lone Omega didn't get to play hero in a world ruled by packs. But she had also learned another truth on the mountain, one that lived deeper than fear. If you can save something and you choose not to, you carry that choice forever. Ilara tightened the strap of her satchel and started toward the sound. The slope rose steeply, and the snow deepened with every step. Her boots sank to mid-calf, then to her knees. Wind shoved at her like an impatient hand. She leaned forward, forcing her way through it, using her walking stick to test for hidden holes. The whimper came again, closer now, weaker. It wasn't calling out anymore. It was failing. Ilara's pace quickened despite the burn in her thighs. Her breath came in white bursts. The metallic scent thickened until it coated the back of her throat. Blood. Fresh. She crested a small ridge and saw the hollow, a natural dip behind a fallen cedar, sheltered from the worst of the wind. Snow had drifted over it, forming a shallow bowl. From above, it might have looked untouched, but there was red on the white. Ilara slid down into the hollow on purpose, knees hitting the snow. She almost didn't see the pup at first because it blended with the shadows, dark fur against dark wood. Then it moved, a trembling shiver. It lay on its side, half-curled, as if trying to become smaller than pain. Its coat was black, but not a glossy black like healthy wool's. This was dull dirt-streaked, matted with ice. The pup's muzzle was dusted with snow where its breath had slowed enough for flakes to land and stay. Its eyes were open, silver-gray and unfocused, like moonlight trapped behind glass. Ilara's stomach turned. She'd seen death before. In the valley, it came loud. Fights, punishment, a sickly elder left behind for the good attack. On the mountain, it came quiet. A frozen bird under a bush. A rabbit stiff in a snare. A deer too exhausted to run from wolves. This pup was caught between the two, injured by violence, dying by cold. Ilara moved closer, careful, palms open. Even dying animals could bite. Even pups had instincts. "Hey," she said softly, her voice sounding strange and hollow. "Easy." The pup tried to lift its head. Its neck trembled. It managed an inch, then failed, jaw falling back in the snow, with a dull thump. A sound escaped Ilara that she didn't recognize at first. A broken little breath. She reached out slowly and brushed snow from the pup's face. Her glove came away red. There were puncture wounds along its side, 2 neat holes and a ragged tear where teeth had ripped free. The blood had slowed, thickening in the cold, but it was still bleeding, a terrible sign. The pup's body was spending what little warmth it had left trying to keep itself alive. Ilara's eyes flicked to the hind legs. One was wrong, not shattered open, but bent at an angle that made her own the ache in sympathy. A dislocation, or a fracture near the joint. Untreated, it would cripple the pup if the pup lived that long. Ilara swallowed hard and pressed her fingers to the pup's throat, finding the faint flutter of a pulse. Still here. Barely. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I've got you." She had no stretcher. No time. No room for hesitation. Ilara tugged off her scarf. The thick wool already warm from her throat. She slid it beneath the pup's body as gently as she could, making a sling. When she lifted, the pup made a tiny sound, pain, protest, something, and then went limp again. Ilara's arms tightened automatically, cradling it against her chest. The pup was shockingly light. Even for its age, it was too thin. She could feel the ridges of its ribs through layers of fur and scarf. Its breath was shallow and uneven, like it was forgetting how to breathe between attempts. "Stay with me," Ilara muttered, more command than comfort. "Not like this. Not out here." She turned to climb out of the hollow, and her boot struck something half buried beneath the snow. Leather. Ilara paused, staring down. A collar. Not a simple strap, like hunters use to mark dogs. Not a rough cord like mountain packs might weave. This was worked leather, supple even in cold, with metal studs and a class too fine to be made in the villages. And on the front, stamped into a small silver plate, was a symbol so familiar even Ilara's isolated life couldn't erase it from memory. A crown. The High Court crest. Ilara's mouth went dry. The Alpha King's pack wasn't just another pack. In the lowlands, their authority was treated like weather, unquestioned, inevitable. They kept the peace, they collected tribute, they settled disputes between lesser alphas. Their wolves were the ones people stepped aside for, without being told. Ilara stared at the collar, like it might bite her. A pup wearing that crest would have been guarded. A pup wearing that crest would have been important. So why was it here, alone and bleeding out in a snow hollow? Ilara's mind flashed through possibilities too quickly to settle on one. An ambush, a kidnapping, a power play inside the court itself. None of it was good. All of it meant one thing. Someone would come looking. Ilara's fingers closed around the collar. For a moment, she considered leaving it, pretending she'd never seen it. But she knew better. The crest would tell her who she was dealing with. And she needed every scrap of information if she wanted to keep the pup alive. She shoved the collar into her pocket and started downhill. The wind clawed at her cloak, trying to pry her prize away. Snow swirled, stinging her cheeks. Ilara leaned into it, holding the pup under her coat, so its body could steal warmth from hers. The pup stirred once, faintly. A small nose pressed against the fabric near her collarbone. A weak inhale. Ilara's chest tightened. It wasn't just an injured animal. It was a life choosing, however shakily, to stay. Her boot slipped on a hidden patch of ice. She caught herself on a tree trunk, grunting, and adjusted her grip. The pup's weight shifted, and its breath hitched. "Sorry," Ilara murmured. I know. She talked the whole way back, not because she thought the pup understood, but because silence felt too close to the funeral. "You're going to hate my cabin," she muttered. "It's small and it smells like smoke. The stove argues with me, but it's warm, warmer than this, at least." The pup didn't respond, but it stayed breathing. When Ilara finally saw her cabin through the trees, a fierce relief flooded her, so suddenly she almost stumbled again. She fumbled with the latch, shoulder-checking the door open, and stepped inside with a gust of snow and wind at her heels. She kicked the door shut hard enough to rattle the frame. Warmth hit her face in a wave. The fire she'd fed earlier had done its job. The room smelled of ash and pine. Ilara crossed the hearth and lowered herself to the floor, easing the pup onto her blanket. Its eyes fluttered open, then closed again. She stripped off her gloves with shaking hands. Her fingers were numb, clumsy. No time. Ilara grabbed a pot, poured water, set it on the stove. She pulled her herb jar down, her cloth strips, her small carving knife. She moved as if a rhythm had taken over her body, something older than thought. Only when she knelt beside the pup again did she allow herself to look at it properly. The pup's ear was torn at the tip. One paw pad was scraped raw. The puncture wounds were ugly, swelling at the edges even in the cold. And beneath the mess, beneath the weakness, there was an undeniable shape to it. Even starving, even wounded, it was built for power. Broad shoulders, thick neck, a jawline that would one day be frightening. Ilara's eyes slid to the pup's throat as it swallowed faintly. No collar now, just skin and fur and her blanket. "Listen," she whispered, leaning close. "You don't have to be anybody in here. You don't have to be court or crest or heir or whatever they think you are." The pup's eyelids trembled. Ilara swallowed around a tightness in her throat. "In here," she said, voice turning firm. "You just have to live." Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters like impatient knuckles. Somewhere down the valleys, Where the high court ruled and the pack laws were sharp as teeth, wolves would notice a missing crest. They would scent the absence like blood in water. And Alara, lonely Omega, mountain dweller, nobody of consequence, had just done the one thing that turned the world's gaze toward her. She had taken what the Alpha King believed belonged to him. Alara dipped a cloth into warming water, wrung it out, and touched it gently to the pup's wound. The pup flinched barely. Alara's jaw set. "All right," she murmured. "Let's start." The first rule of saving a life was simple. Don't let panic take your hands. Alara knelt beside the blanket and forced herself to breathe the way she did when storms trapped her indoors, slow, measured, like counting steps on a steep climb. The pup lay on its side near the stove, the heat painting a faint shimmer across its dark fur. Up close, the smell of blood was stronger, iron-heavy and wrong in a place that usually smelled of smoke and pine sap. Alara pressed 2 fingers to its throat again. A pulse. Thin. Fast. But there. "Good," she whispered, as if praise could anchor it to the world. "Stay." The pup's eyelids fluttered. Its gaze slid toward her and stuck, unfocused, but present enough to register the shape of her face. Alara had the strange urge to smile, an instinct as old as hunger, then stopped herself. Smiling didn't set bones. Smiling didn't stop bleeding. She stood quickly, shaking feeling back into her fingers. The stove's heat had begun to thaw her numbness, but not enough. She needed hot water. A pot, snow from the barrel by the door. A ladle. The metal clanged, loud in the small cabin. The pup startled at the sound and tried to curl tighter. Pain tightened its body, drawing its legs in. Then it jerked with sharp, involuntary whine when the injured hind leg moved wrong. Alara swore under her breath. "Sorry. I'm sorry," she said, lowering her voice and her movements. No sudden noises. "Got it." She set the pot on the stove and fed the fire until it roared. The cabin brightened in flickering orange, shadows moving like restless spirits along the walls. On the shelves above her workbench sat jars of dried herbs and bundles of twine, a worn mortar and pestle, and 2 chipped mugs. Nothing in her life was elegant, but it was useful. Useful was what kept you breathing. The pup's breathing hitched again. Its ribs lifted too sharply, too quickly. Shock, cold, blood loss, fear, a nasty cocktail. Alara crouched beside it and checked the puncture wounds along its side. The bite marks were deep enough that her stomach twisted. 2 clean punctures, and 1 torn gash where teeth had dragged free. The edges were swollen, angry. If infection set in, the mountain wouldn't care how noble the pup's bloodline might be. She tore a strip from an old linen shirt and rolled it tight. When the water in the pot began to steam, she dipped the cloth and wrung it out, then cleaned around the wounds carefully, wiping away clotted blood and bits of pine needle trapped in the fur. The pup trembled. Alara kept her touch firm but gentle. I know it burns." The pup's ears flattened. It let out a faint, broken sound, too weak to be a growl, too proud to be a plea. Something about the stubbornness, even in its pain, made Alara's chest ache. "You're not going to scare me off," she murmured. "I've dealt with worse attitudes than yours." As she cleaned, she found another mark along the pup's flank, bruising that wasn't from teeth, a dark smear under the skin, as if it had slammed into rock or been thrown. Alara's hands paused for half a heartbeat. Her mind chased a thought and skidded into a wall of questions she couldn't afford. Not now. She finished cleaning and pressed the cloth against a gash to stop the slow seep of blood. It wasn't spurting, thank the mountain, but it wasn't closing either. She stood and grabbed her jar of pine resin, thick and amber, and a small pouch of dried yarrow. She crushed the yarrow between her palms until it powdered, then mixed it into the resin on a flat stone. The smell rose sharp and green, almost bitter enough to sting her eyes. Natural antiseptic. Sticky sealant. It would buy time. The pup watched her now with slightly clearer focus, following her hands. There was intelligence in that gaze, too alert for something half dead. Not the wide-eyed innocence of a village pup. This one looked like it had already seen hierarchy, already learned to measure outcomes. That unsettled Alara more than the blood. "Hold still," she told it, And this time she didn't soften command. As if it understood, the pup went still. Ilera packed the resin mixture into the ragged tear first, then dabbed it over the punctures. The pup flinched hard at the first touch and snapped its jaws reflexively, teeth clicking just shy of her wrist. Ilera didn't jerk back. She simply held its gaze, steady and unafraid. "No," she said quietly. The pup froze mid-snap, startled by her tone more than her presence. Ilera kept her hand in place. "You can bite. I know you can. But if you do, I still won't drop you. And then we'll both be bleeding, and that's a stupid way to die." For a moment, the pup stared at her like it was recalculating the world. Then its jaw loosened. Its head sank back into the blanket, breath coming out in a shudder. Ilera let herself exhale too. "Good," she whispered. "That's good. Next, the leg." Ilera's eyes slid down to the hind limb, and her mouth tightened. The joint was swollen, the angle wrong. She'd seen dislocations in hunters and broken paws in winter wolves. Pain had a familiar shape, but this was a pup, too young to understand what she needed to do, too weak to fight her off properly. She walked to her cupboard, opened it, and pulled down a small tin of dried valerian and poppy seed. Tiny, precious stores she used sparingly. Pain relief. Sedation. She hesitated. Using too much could slow breathing. Using too little would mean the pup fought, twisting the injury worse. Ilera measured a pinch with trembling fingers, then mixed it into a spoonful of warm goat milk. Her goat milk, the last of it until spring. She stared at the mug a moment, listening to the wind batter the cabin, like it was angry at her for choosing mercy. Then she carried the spoon to the pup. "Drink," she said softly. "Please." The pup's nose flared. It didn't understand a word, but it understood scent. Milk meant warmth, survival. Its tongue flicked out, tasting. It swallowed a little, then a little more. Ilera held the spoon steady until it had taken enough. "Good," she murmured, feeling absurdly proud. "There you go." Within minutes, the pup's eyelids began to droop. Its breathing eased into something less frantic. The tension in its shoulders loosened, as if the pain had stepped back just far enough to give her room to work. Ilera gathered supplies. 2 straight branches shaved smooth, cloth strips, a length of twine. She knelt beside the pup and placed one hand on its hip to stabilize it. "This is going to hurt," she whispered anyway, because lying to it felt wrong. "But it's the kind of hurt that keeps you walking later. Understand?" The pup's eyes half open and fixed on her face. There was something in that look, resignation, maybe, or trust born of exhaustion. Ilera took that as permission. She moved fast. One sharp pull, a twist guided by knowledge and instinct. The joint slid back into place with a sickening, wet pop. The pup's body arched. A scream tore out of it, startlingly loud in the tiny cabin. It thrashed once, claws scraping the floor. The sound cut off into a ragged, gasping whine. Ilera was already there, arms wrapping around its shoulders, holding it close without crushing it. "Shoo, shoo, shoo," she murmured, rocking slightly. I know. Breathe, breathe. It's done." The pup's whole body shook. It tried to pull away, then collapsed into her, panting, its muzzle pressing into her sleeve like it didn't know where else to put the pain. Ilera swallowed hard. She hadn't held anyone like this in years. Not since the valley, not since she'd learned that affection could be used as a leash. But this wasn't a leash. This was survival. When the pup's shaking eased, Ilera set the splint. She wrapped the branches along the leg and bound them with cloth and twine, snug enough to hold, loose enough not to cut circulation. Then she checked the paw pads, cleaning and wrapping the scraped one. By the time she finished, sweat dampened the back of her neck, despite the winter air leaking through the walls. She sat back on her heels and looked down at the pup. It lay still now, breathing deeper. Its eyes were closed, lashes dark against its fur. If not for the rise and fall of its ribs, it could have been carved from shadow. Ilera rubbed a hand over her face. "All right," she said to the empty cabin. "You're stabilized. Now you just have to not die." Outside, a gust slammed the shutters. The mountain had an opinion about that plan. Ilera stood, poured more milk into a small pot, and warmed it carefully, stirring so it wouldn't scorch. She didn't have a proper nursing bottle, so she used what she had, a strip of cloth twisted into a makeshift wick, dipped into milk, so the pup could suckle without choking. When she offered it, the pup's nose twitched. It didn't wake fully, but its mouth found the cloth and latched. Ilera watched, transfixed, as it drank, weakly at first, then with growing urgency. Its tongue worked, its throat swallowing. A tiny miracle in the shape of appetite. Ilera felt a laugh bubble up, half relief, half disbelief. "You're hungry," she whispered. "Good. That's good." As it drank, she studied it more closely. There were signs of grooming. Fur around its neck, slightly cleaner than the rest, as if someone had once cared for it. Its claws were trimmed, not jagged. The teeth that flashed when it snapped were white, and even not chipped from scavenging. This pup hadn't been wild-born. It had been raised. Protected, until it wasn't. Ilera's gaze drifted to her pocket, where the torn collar sat like a lump of ice. She could feel it even without touching it, heavy with meaning. When the pup finished drinking, it sighed and fell into deeper sleep, milk dampening the cloth at its mouth. Ilera stood and moved to the workbench, hands automatically washing in hot water with a harsh soap she'd made herself. The blood swirled pink down the basin and vanished. She dried her hands, then pulled the collar out. In the firelight, the silver crest caught bright. A crown, stylized and sharp, the symbol of the High Court. Ilera stared at it until her eyes burned. Her mind tried to assemble a future from the pieces she had. If she returned the pup, the court might reward her. Might. They might call her a hero. They might call her loyal. Or they might call her a liar. They might ask how an Omega ended up alone on the mountain, where she came from, why she left, who she belonged to. Omegas didn't get to simply leave. Not in the lowlands. If she kept the pup, the court would come. Not maybe. Not someday. They would come like winter comes. Inevitable. Ilera's stomach nodded. She remembered the way Alpha's voices could fill a room and make every other voice smaller. She remembered the sharp obedience in pack eyes, the way everyone watched the leader before they dared to breathe. She was alone, and she just dragged trouble into her cabin and wrapped it in her scarf. Ilera's hands tightened around the collar until the leather creaked. "Why were you out there?" she whispered, not to the crest, not even to the pup, but to the mountain. "What happened to you?" The mountain didn't answer. So she did what she always did when life offered no good choices. She prepared. Ilera lifted a floorboard near the hearth, the one she'd loosened years ago for storage. Under was a narrow cavity lined with cloth. She kept her most important items there. A flint kit, a small pouch of salt, a blade she'd stolen from a valley when she left. She placed the collar inside, like it was something poisonous, then slid the floorboard back into place and stamped it down. Hidden, not solved, just delayed. A soft sound made her turn. The pup had opened its eyes. It stared at her, fully awake now. The sedation faded enough to bring back awareness. Its gaze moved from her face to the stove, to the shelves, to the door, as if mapping the space. Then it looked at her again. Something passed between them. Quiet, wordless. Ilera sat back down on the floor, not too close, letting the pup decide the distance. "You're safe," she told it. "For now." The pup's ears twitched. Ilera sighed. "I'm talking like you understand me." The pup blinked slowly. It wasn't the dumb blink of confusion. It was almost deliberate. Ilera's lips pressed together. She fought the urge to reach out again. If she pushed too fast, it would retreat into fear. If she acted like a pack alpha, it would learn to obey or to hate. She didn't want either. So she offered something simpler. Her palm. She extended her hand and waited. The pup stared at it, then at her face, as if weighing motives. Slowly, painfully slowly, it lifted its head and leaned forward, sniffing her fingers. Warm breath, milk-sweet blood metal, alive. Then, with a small movement that felt like permission, it nudged her hand with its nose. Ilera's throat tightened. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, then." She stroked its forehead once, gentle. The pup made a low sound, almost a rumble, then lowered its head again, eyes closing as if the touch had pulled it into rest. Ilera sat there, hand hovering in the air after the contact, stunned by how much that tiny gesture had mattered. She stayed on the floor until the fire burned lower and the cabin dimmed into evening. She fed the stove again, then sat with her back against the wall, watching the pup sleep. Every so often, it twitched, dreaming, perhaps. Its paws flexed like it was running. Its muzzle wrinkled, then smoothed. Ilera wondered what it dreamed of. A pack? A warm den? A mother's scent? Or teeth in panic and being dragged into snow? The thought made her chest go hard with anger. If the court had failed this pup, if anyone had, she stopped herself again. Anger didn't heal. Anger didn't keep the stove fed. She checked the wound dressing. Still sealed. The pup's breathing was steadier now, less ragged. She touched its ear. It was warmer, no longer icy. Good signs. Later, when it woke hungry again, Ilera warmed more milk and fed it carefully. The pup drank with less hesitation this time, eyes half-lidded as if it had decided that she was, at least for now, part of the solution. When it finished, it sat up shakily on its front legs, wobbling like a newborn foal. Its back end stayed tucked awkwardly because of the splint. It looked at the door, then back at her. Ilera understood the question. "You can't go out," she said gently. "Not yet. You'll freeze, and you'll tear your leg up worse." The pup's ears flattened, frustrated. It let out a small huff that might have been a complaint. Ilera felt a strange warm bloom in her chest at the sheer audacity of it. "You're already giving me attitude," she murmured. "Bold. I respect it." The pup stared at her, then, slowly, shifted its weight and crawled a little closer, dragging its splinted leg carefully. It stopped just within reach of her knee and sat, not touching, just close enough to share heat. Ilera didn't move. She didn't want to scare it off. Minutes passed. The fire snapped. Wind hissed at the corners of the cabin. Then the pup leaned sideways and pressed its shoulder against her shin. The contact was light. Testing. Ilera's eyes stung. She rested her hand on its back, just the weight of her palm, nothing more. The pup didn't flinch this time. It sighed, long and deep, like it had been holding its breath for days. That was when Ilera realized the truth she'd been avoiding since she found it. It wasn't only that she had saved the pup. The pup, by choosing to lean into her, was saving something in her too. She had forgotten what it felt like to be chosen without being owned. Ilera swallowed and stared down at the dark fur under her hand. "You need a name," she said aloud, as if naming it would make the situation less dangerous and more manageable. The pup lifted its head slightly, ears angling toward her voice. Ilera hesitated. Names mattered. Names were identity. Names were a way of saying this is yours. And she wasn't sure she had the right to claim anything. But then the pup nudged her shin again, impatient, and Ilera almost smiled. "Fine," she murmured. "I'll pick something. You can hate it later." She watched the way the firelight slid over its coat, turning it from black to deep midnight. She thought of the hollow she'd found it in, shadowed, hidden from wind, as if the mountain itself had tried to shelter it. "Nix," she said softly. "Like night." The pup blinked. Ilera leaned closer. "Not because you're scary. Because night can be protective. Quiet. It covers things that need hiding." Nix made a small sound, not quite approval, not quite refusal. But it didn't move away. Ilera took that as the closest thing to consent she was going to get. "All right then," she said. "Nix it is." She sat with him until sleep took him again, his head finally settling on her boot like it belonged there. Ilera stared into the fire and listened to the world outside, the endless winter, the mountains slow breathing. She tried to imagine a high court far below, stone halls, banners, wolves with polished authority. Somewhere in that world, someone would notice the air-marked pup was gone, and they would come, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But the crests in her floorboards felt like a ticking thing. Ilera looked down at the sleeping wolf pressed against her leg, and the fear that should have been loudest wasn't the fear of the court. It was the fear of what would happen to him if she gave him back to the wrong kind of home. She reached out, brushed 2 fingers lightly over Nix's ear, and whispered a promise she hadn't planned to make. "I'll keep you alive," she said, "as long as you'll let me." Outside, the wind dragged itself across the roof like claws. Inside, an omega and a newly named wolf shared warmth in the smallest kingdom Alara had ever known. And somewhere beyond the tree line and the snow line, fate started walking uphill. Years didn't pass on the wheat pinez the way they did in the lowlands. In the valleys, time was measured by gatherings, pack councils, harvest feasts, mating seasons announced with ceremony and scent. Up here, time was measured by what the mountain allowed you to do without killing you. The first thaw, the first freeze, the first day you could walk to the stream without a pickaxe. And for Alara, time was measured by Nix. By the way his paws outgrew the blanket she'd laid him on that first night. By the way his ribs disappeared under muscle. By the way his eyes sharpened from foggy silver into something that felt less like a pup's gaze and more like a judge's. The winter after she named him, Nix learned to stand. At first it was pitiful. Front legs braced, hind leg dragging awkwardly with a splint, his body swaying like a sapling in wind. Alara sat on the floor beside him, one hand hovering near his shoulder without touching, ready to catch him if he fell. He fell anyway. He fell hard enough that Alara flinched, heart clenching, but he didn't cry. He just lay there for a moment, breathing through the pain, then tried again. Stubborn, Alara muttered, half fond, half terrified. "Fine, be stubborn. Just don't be dead." Nix's ears flicked, as if he understood the insult and took it as praise. By spring, the leg had set strong. It never became perfect. On cold mornings, he'd move with a slight hitch, a reminder carved into bone that the world had once tried to end him. Alara worried over it like a mother, checking swelling, rubbing warmth into the joint with her hands. Nix tolerated it for exactly as long as it benefited him. Once he realized he could walk without her help, he began to hate being handled. He'd pull away with a low, offended huff, as if her concern was an accusation. All right, Alara would say, lifting her hands. "Your Majesty, forgive me." Nix would sit back on his haunches, still too big for his age, and look at her as though deciding whether to grant mercy. Alara discovered quickly that Nix didn't respond to domination. When she raised her voice, he didn't shrink. He didn't cower the way valley pups did when an alpha barked. He simply went still, eyes narrowing, like he was marking her tone as information. It unnerved her at first. Then, slowly, it became the thing she loved most about him, because it meant the mountain had given him something the packs had tried to beat out of her, the right to not fold. So Alara taught him differently. Not obey, but understand. Not submit, but choose. She talked to him while she worked, as if language was another tool she could pass down. "This is yarrow," she'd say, crushing leaves between her fingers. "Good for bleeding. Smells bitter. Taste it. No, don't chew it, you menace. Just smell." Nix would sniff, sneeze dramatically, then glare as if she'd insulted him on purpose. "And this," Alara would continue, "is why we don't hunt the rabbits near the creek in spring. Let them breed. The mountain gives back if you don't act like a greedy fool." Nix would tilt his head, ears angled forward, listening with that unervingly serious attention. It was never the attention of a dog being trained. It was the attention of a predator being educated. By the time Nix was 8 months old, he could follow her tracks without leaving his own. He could move through brush without snapping twigs, could freeze mid-step when her hand lifted, could melt into shadow behind a boulder. So completely Alara sometimes lost him until he decided she'd worried long enough. At first, that scared her. Then she realized he was practicing, hunting her, in a way, learning her movements the way a pack learns its territory. Except Nix never pounced, never lunged, never used a skill against her. He'd simply appear beside her again, tail flicking once in quiet satisfaction. "See? I can." Alara would pinch the bridge of her nose. "You're going to give me gray hair." Nix would blink slowly, unbothered. By the second year, he was larger than any mountain wolf Alara had ever seen. Not just tall, dense, built like something meant to break through lines, meant to hold ground. His shoulders broadened. His chest deepened. His jaw became heavy and defined, a weapon even when relaxed. And still, despite the power growing into him like a second skeleton, he never acted like a brute. He didn't bully the smaller animals beyond what hunting required. He didn't waste. He didn't kill for sport. He watched, always watching. Sometimes Alara caught him standing on the ridge at dusk, head lifted, eyes fixed downhill toward where the valleys lay hidden beyond layers of forest. He'd stand there so long the sky would fade from gold to bruise, purple to black, and still he wouldn't move. Alara learned not to interrupt those moments. They felt old, like memories stirred beneath his skin. Once, in late autumn when the air tasted smoke from distant lowland fires, Alara climbed the ridge with a bundle of snares in her arms and found Nix already there. He didn't turn when she approached. Only his ears flicked back, acknowledging her presence. "Alara," she said softly, and it startled her every time, hearing her own name spoken into a world that usually only echoed wind. Nix's head angled slightly, just enough that she saw his profile against the sky. He looked carved from darkness, a silhouette with silver eyes. Alara set the snares down and sat on the cold rock beside him. "What is it?" she asked. Nix's gaze stayed fixed downhill. Alara followed it. There was nothing there but distance. But she smelled it then, faint, carried on wind, like a ghost of a scent she hadn't encountered in years. Wolves. Not mountain wolves. Pack wolves. Well-fed. Groomed. The faint spice of oils and herbs used to keep coats glossy. The iron tang of work metal, buckles, weapons, crests. Alara's stomach tightened. Nix's lips lifted slightly, not in a snarl, but in something like bitterness. "You remember," Alara whispered. Nix's tail flicked once, sharp. She stared into the valley haze and thought of the collar under her floorboards. She hadn't touched it in years. She'd almost convinced herself she never needed to. Almost convinced herself that the court had stopped looking, that fate had shrugged and turned away. But the mountain never gave gifts without cost. "Alara," she told herself, voice steady, "you can't keep hiding forever." Nix turned to look at her then, and the intensity of it made her breath catch. There was intelligence in his eyes, yes, but something else too. Something like a question. "Do you regret it?" Alara's throat tightened. She reached up, fingers brushing his neck, where fur was thickest. "No," she whispered. "Never." Nix's ears eased, a tension leaving his posture, so subtly a lesser observer would have missed it. He leaned into her touch for one brief moment, then pulled away like he'd given too much. Alara smiled faintly despite the fear crawling up her spine. Still proud, still stubborn, still hers, in the only way that mattered. The third year was the year Nick stopped being a wolf and became a presence. He began patrolling around the cabin without being asked, not wandering like a curious adolescent, but moving in purposeful circuits. Dawn, dusk, midnight, sometimes, when Alara woke to the faint creak of the door as he slipped out and then the soft thud of it settling again when he returned. She tried to scold him once. "You can't just disappear," she said, irritated more by her own worry than his behavior. "If you get hurt out there—" Nick stared at her. Then he walked to the door, nosed it open, and stepped outside. Alara followed, fuming, only to find him standing still in the snow, gaze fixed on the tree-line. Tracks. Fresh. Heavy. Too evenly spaced. Not deer. Not elk. Not a wandering wolf. Alara crouched, brushing powder away. The print was larger than hers, deep, pressed in with deliberate weight. More than one set. A group. Her heart thudded. Nix looked down at her, eyes unreadable. Alara swallowed. How long have they been this close? Nix huffed. It might have been too long. Alara stood slowly, scanning the trees. The morning was quiet. Too quiet, the way it got when predators were near, and everything else held its breath. "All right," she whispered. "We move smart." She didn't have many things worth taking, but she had enough to survive. Her knife, her salt, her flint, her herb jars, her winter furs. She had hidden caches along the mountain. Places only she knew. Buried tins, dried meat wrapped in wax cloth. She created them in her first years when she hadn't trusted the cabin to stand. Now, she might need them for a different reason. Ilera went back inside, forcing her hands not to shake, and began packing. Nyx paced at the doorway like a shadow with teeth, ears pricked, listening to the world beyond. They didn't leave that day. They didn't have to. The tracks never came closer. Whoever had been there had passed through, circled, and moved on. But something had changed. The mountain felt watched. After that, Nyx started bringing her things. Not gifts like a domestic animal trying to earn favor. Nyx's offerings were messages. A scrap of blue cloth caught on thorn. A broken leather strap that smelled like polished oil. A sliver of metal, thin, engraved, unmistakably crafted by a high-pack smith. Ilera held each object in her palm like it was a coal from a fire she thought extinguished. "They're not just wandering," she murmured one evening as she examined the blue cloth. "They're searching." Nyx stared at the cloth, then at her. Ilera looked away, swallowing the panic she didn't want him to smell. "I know." Nyx's tail lashed once, sharp and agitated. Ilera reached out and grasped the thick fur at his ruff, grounding herself in his solid warmth. "We'll handle it," she whispered. "We always do." Nyx's ears eased slightly, but his eyes stayed hard. During the 4th year, Ilera began noticing the ways Nyx didn't fit even the mountain's wildness. He didn't scent mark like other wolves. Not carelessly. Anyway, when he marked, it was precise, strategic. A line along the ridge. A warning at the creek crossing. A claim on the clearing near the cabin. And he always marked last, after checking the perimeter, after sniffing the air, as if he understood territory not as a place to roam, but as a thing to defend. Once, late in summer, a pair of younger mountain wolves ventured too close. Ilera spotted them first. A gray male and a tawny female, lean, hungry, curious. They stood at the tree lean, watching the cabin with cautious interest. Ilera held still, heart in her throat. Wolves didn't usually approach humans here. Nyx stepped out from behind the cabin. He didn't charge. He didn't snarl. He simply stood. Tall, unmoving. His body radiated quiet power. The air seemed to tighten around him. The two wolves froze. Nyx lowered his head slightly, eyes locked on them. A sound rumbled in his chest, not loud, but deep enough that Ilera felt it in her own bones. The gray male's ears flattened. The tawny female backed away. Nyx didn't pursue. He just held the line until they vanished into the trees. Ilera stared at him, unsettled. "That was—" she began. Nyx glanced back at her, expression unreadable. Ilera finished weakly. "Very alpha of you." Nyx's ears flicked as if the word annoyed him. Ilera let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, me too." Nyx walked over to her then, pressed his head into her hip with firmness that wasn't affection so much a statement. "Mine." Ilera's throat tightened again, a familiar ache rising. In the valleys, mine had always meant possession. With Nyx, it meant protection. Ilera rested her hand on his head. "I'm not going anywhere," she murmured. Nyx's tail flicked once, satisfied. But Ilera knew the truth. They might not get to choose forever. The 5th year brought the first sign that the high court search had narrowed. It happened in early winter, when the snow was fresh and the world was painfully bright. Ilera was returning from the stream with 2 buckets of water, her arms aching, when Nyx appeared from the trees with his hackles raised. He didn't bark, didn't howl. He never made noise without purpose. He simply moved fast, circling her once, then stopping directly in front of her, blocking her path back to the cabin. Ilera's stomach dropped. "What is it?" Nyx's nostrils flared. His gaze cut toward the wind. Ilera inhaled. And there it was, a scent that didn't belong. Not wolf. Human. Leather. Metal. Fire oil. And beneath it all, the clean sharpness of high pack. Disciplined bodies, trained hunters. Ilera's hands tightened on the bucket handles until her knuckles went white. Nyx's lips lifted, a real snarl now, teeth flashing. Ilera set the buckets down carefully, heart hammering. How close? Nyx's head turned again, downhill. Close. Ilera's mind raced. If they were human hunters from the valley, she could hide. The mountain had caves and ridges and dense pines. She could vanish. But if they were court wolves, the mountain couldn't hide scent forever. Not from train trackers. Ilara forced herself to breathe. "Okay," she whispered, touching Nyx's shoulder. "We don't panic." Nyx's gaze snapped to her, intense. Ilara swallowed. I know you could fight. But if you fight, they'll know for sure they're in the right place." Nyx's tail lashed once, furious. Ilara's fingers tightened in his fur. "Listen to me. We survive first. We choose battle only if we have to." Nyx held her stare for a long moment. Then, slowly, he exhaled a puff of steam from his nostrils. A reluctant agreement. Ilara grabbed her buckets again and hurried back toward the cabin. Footsteps careful, ears straining. Inside, she shut the door, barred it, and moved fast. She smothered the stove fire until it was only embers, less smoke, less scent. She shoved loose herbs into sealed tins. She checked her floorboard cache and made sure the collar was still hidden. Nyx paced the cabin, restless, like a storm trapped in fur. "Ilara," she told herself again. "Think. If the court found her with Nyx, they'd take him. They might hurt her. They might not. But she couldn't count on mercy from people who saw her as a lower caste. And what about Nyx? Would he go willingly if they called him by his birth name? Would something inside him answer to blood? Ilara's chest tightened so hard it hurt. She looked at Nyx. Nyx looked back. His gaze was steady, certain, as if he already knew the answer to her fear. "I chose you." Ilara's eyes stung. "You're not just a wolf," she whispered, voice shaking despite her effort. "Are you?" Nyx blinked slowly. He didn't deny it. A dull horn sound rolled through the distance, faint but unmistakably structured, not natural. Ilara froze. Nyx's whole body went rigid. Another horn, closer. Ilara's mouth went dry. "That's not a hunter's call," she whispered. That's pack authority." Nyx's lips curled again, but his posture stayed controlled. He wasn't panicking. He was preparing. Ilara forced herself to act. She grabbed her cloak, her knife, her flint, and her salt pouch. She packed a small bundle of dried meat and slipped it into her satchel. Not enough to flee forever, just enough to survive a few nights if she had to run. Nyx watched her with something like impatience. "I know," she said, breathless. "I know you want to go out there and tear the threat apart. But—" The horn sounded again, loud enough now that the cabin's walls seemed to vibrate. Ilara stopped mid-sentence. Nyx turned his head toward the door, ears forward, gaze hard. Ilara swallowed and stepped to the small window, lifting the cloth covering it just enough to see. At first, she saw only snow and trees. Then movement, dark shapes sliding between trunks, too coordinated to be strays. A line of wolves. Sleek, well-fed, moving in formation. Ilara's pulse roared in her ears. High court. She could see flashes of metal at their throats. Crests. She could smell them even through the walls now, clean and sharp and powerful. And then she saw the one at the front. Not just a wolf. A man. Tall, cloaked, moving with calm authority as if the mountain belonged to him by right. The wolves around him seemed to orient around his presence like iron filings around a magnet. Even from this distance, Ilara felt the pressure of dominance, a familiar lowland force that tried to bend her spine and make her smaller. Her hands shook. She lowered the cloth and turned to Nyx. Nyx was already at the door, standing like a wall of dark fur and muscle. His tail was low, controlled. His head was high. His eyes were cold silver. Not fear. Defiance. Ilara's throat tightened around a laugh that wasn't funny. "Of course," she whispered. "Of course this is what it comes to." She stepped beside Nyx, shoulder to shoulder, and put her hand on his ruff. Light, not restraining, just present. The knocking didn't come as a knock. It came as a command in the form of sound. The horn again, then silence, then a voice outside carrying clear through winter air. By order of the High Court, the voice called, "Open!" Nyx's lips lifted. Ilara's heart hammered. She drew in a breath, so cold it burned. Then she reached for the bar. Not because she wanted to, because she knew hiding was over. When she opened the door, wind and snow swept into the cabin like a living thing. Nick stepped forward first, placing his body between Alara and the clearing. Alara followed, boots crunching into the snow. Below the cabin, a dozen court wolves stood in disciplined formation, and at their front stood the Alpha King. He looked up at Nyx, and something flickered in his eyes, recognition sharp enough to cut. "The lost one," the Alpha King said, voice steady as steel. "At last." Alara's hand tightened on Nyx's shoulder. The wolves' gazes slid to her, assessing, dismissive, curious. The Alpha King's eyes met hers for the first time, and Alara understood in one sickening heartbeat that the real battle wasn't going to be teeth and claws. It was going to be power. And she, Omega, mountain dweller, nobody was about to stand in the way of a king. The High Court arrived like a verdict. They filled the clearing below Alara's cabin with deliberate symmetry. Wolves in a half moon, bodies angled outward to guard their king's flanks, tails held with disciplined stillness. Even their breathing felt regulated. Nothing about them resembled the mountain packs that drifted through the wheat pines in loose, hungry bands. These wolves belonged to order, to power, to the valley. Alara stood in her doorway with Nyx in front of her, his body a wall of dark fur and controlled violence. Snow swirled between them in the court like ash from an unseen fire. The Alpha King, Rowan, waited at the center of the half moon, cloak snapping at his calves, hands bare in the cold, as if winter didn't dare touch him. His eyes stayed on Nyx, not on the cabin, not on Alara, not on the mountain, on Nyx, as if the rest of the world was a stage built solely to hold that single figure. "The lost one," Rowan said again, voice carrying cleanly through the wind. "At last." Nyx's lips lifted, not in fear, but in warning. A low sound rolled from his chest, deep enough that Alara felt it in her ribs. Rowan didn't flinch. He simply stepped forward one pace, stopping at the edge of the clearing where the snow had been packed down by his pack's formation. "Kale," he said, and the name struck the air like a thrown knife. "Come." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was an alpha command, honed sharp by years of being obeyed. Alara recognized it the way you recognize thunder. It had weight. It had gravity. It tried to pull the world into alignment. For one terrible heartbeat, Nyx's muscles tightened as if some ancient tether had snapped taut inside him. His ears flicked forward. His breath hitched. Alara's throat went dry. She could almost feel the pressure of the command pressing into him, into his blood, into whatever birthright the crest implied. The court wolves behind Rowan shifted subtly, sensing the moment. Anticipation sharpened their scent. Dominance, certainty, the quiet hunger of a pack about to reclaim what it believed was stolen. Alara's hand, resting on Nyx's shoulder, curled into his fur. She didn't pull him back. She didn't dig her nails in. She didn't cling. She leaned close enough that her lips nearly brushed his ear and spoke so softly only he could hear. "You get to choose," she whispered. Nyx's eyes flicked sideways, silver catching firelight from the cabin behind them. His gaze met hers, and something passed between them. Years of quiet mornings shared hunger, his head against her knee when nightmares woke her, her hand setting his leg, and refusing to let him die. Not ownership, not obedience. Choice. Nyx exhaled, slow and steady, and the tension in his body changed shape. The pull of Rowan's command didn't vanish, but it broke like a rope fraying under stubborn strain. Then Nyx stepped forward. Rowan's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, triumph preparing to rise. Nyx walked past the Alpha King. Not toward him. Past him. Straight back to Alara. He pressed his shoulder into her hip, solid as rock, and faced the court again with his chin lifted. The growl that left him this time wasn't wild. It was measured, royal in its own way. A murmur rippled through the half-moon. Disbelief. Offense. A few court wolves bristled, hackles lifting. Rowan's face stayed composed, but a muscle jumped in his jaw. His gaze lowered to where Nyx leaned against Alara, and for the first time he looked at her like she was more than scenery. "Omega," Rowan said, voice cooling. "You have harbored what belongs to the High Court." Alara's spine stiffened at the word. It landed like a hand on the back of her neck, trying to push her down. She refused to move. "He doesn't belong to you," she said. A sharp bark of laughter came from somewhere in the formation. One of Rowan's wolves, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, and the kind of cruel amusement Illyria remembered from the valley packs. He didn't step out, but his eyes cut to her like a blade. Rowan silenced him with a glance. "He carries our mark," Rowan said. "Our blood." Illyria's voice didn't shake. "He carries scars, too." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "You presume to speak of high court matters?" Illyria pointed to Nyx without looking away from Rowan. "I presume to speak of the wolf I carried down a mountain while he bled into my scarf." The clearing went very still. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if it wanted to listen. Rowan's gaze sharpened. "You found him?" "Yes." "Where?" Illyria's mouth tightened. "In a hollow behind a fallen cedar. Half frozen. Teeth marks in his side. A leg twisted wrong." A tremor of something. Anger? Grief? Passed over Rowan's face too quickly for most eyes to catch. Illyria caught it anyway. She had spent her life studying expressions for danger. Rowan looked at Nyx again, and his voice lowered. Kale was taken. The scarred wolf in the line shifted, impatient. "Your Majesty." Rowan didn't look away. "Silence, Dane." So the scarred one had a name. Illyria filed it away like a weapon. Rowan's attention returned to Illyria. 5 years ago, there was an attack at the court's northern pass. A planned strike. We believe the heir dead. Illyria's stomach tightened. "You believed he was dead, so you stopped looking." Rowan's eyes flashed. "I searched." Illyria held his gaze. "Not hard enough." A hiss moved through the court wolves. Several looked at Illyria as if she'd just spoken blasphemy. Rowan's face hardened, but his voice didn't rise. "You don't know the cost." Illyria's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, I know cost. I paid it in hunger and frost and loneliness. So Thicket try to choke me. Don't talk to me about costs." Nyx's tail flicked once, brushing Illyria's boot, supportive, grounding. Rowan's eyes dropped to that motion, and something in him recalibrated, as if he'd expected a cowering Omega and found a mountain-born blade instead. "Why did you keep him?" Rowan asked. The question came quieter now, less like accusation and more like a test. Illyria's throat tightened around the answer she'd never said out loud. "Because he was dying," she said. "Because I was alone. Because no one else came." Rowan's gaze moved slowly over the cabin behind her. Rough wood, smoke stains, patched window. Then back to Nyx. "You named him," Rowan said. "Illyria," she replied automatically. Rowan's mouth twitched. "The wolf." Illyria hesitated only a beat. "Nyx." A few court wolves flinched at the casualness of it, like the name was an insult to a royal line. Nyx's ears flicked, annoyed by their reaction. Rowan's gaze settled on Nyx's shoulder, where the pale starburst mark showed through dark fur when Nyx shifted. The air mark. The reason the court looked at Nyx like a crown with teeth. Rowan inhaled, slow and controlled. "That mark is not mere lineage," he said, voice carrying like a formal proclamation. "It is a binding. It announces leadership before leadership is earned. It is both gift and curse." Illyria stared at the mark, then back at Rowan. "Then why did you let a cursed gift bleed out in the snow?" Rowan's eyes sharpened again. "Because someone wanted him dead." The words landed heavy. Illyria's pulse thudded. "Someone in your court." Rowan didn't answer directly. His silence was answer enough. Nyx's growl deepened. Rowan's pack tightened, tension rippling through formation. Several wolves glanced sideways at one another. The scent of unease rose, something like fear dressed as loyalty. Dane, the scarred wolf, stepped forward without being invited. "Your Majesty," he said, voice edged with impatience. "This is pointless. The heir is here. Take him. The Omega can be compensated, or—" Nyx's head snapped toward him. The air changed. Illyria felt like a pressure shift before a storm. Nyx's presence sharpened into something ancient and commanding, and for a heartbeat the court wolves stiffened, as if they'd all inhaled at once. Dane's words faltered in his throat. Rowan's voice turned cold enough to frost. "Step back." Dane hesitated, just a fraction too long. Nyx took one step forward. Not a lunge, not an attack, A single, deliberate step. Dane's pupils widened. His shoulders drew tight, like a man realizing he'd misjudged a cliff edge. Nyx didn't bare more teeth. He didn't need to. He simply stared. Illyra recognized it now. The same stillness Nyx used to drive mountain wolves away from the tree-line. The same dominance, but cleaner, more focused, royal without the cruelty. Rowan's eyes flicked between them. Then he did something that stunned the clearing into silence. He turned fully toward Nyx and lowered his head. Not submission, not weakness. Acknowledgement. A bow. It was shallow, but was real. It said, "I see what you are." It said, "I will not drag you like property." It said, "Speak." Rowan lifted his head. "What do you want?" Nyx's ears angled forward. His gaze flicked to Illyra. A question without words. Illyra swallowed hard. This was the moment she'd feared since the first day she saw the crest in the snow. The moment where blood and power would reach for him with a hand she couldn't fight. She forced herself not to cling, not to beg, not to turn love into a leash. She stepped forward until she stood beside Nyx, not behind him, and spoke quietly. "If you want to go," she said, voice raw, "I won't stop you." The words tasted like grief. Nyx's eyes held hers. The intensity of it burned. Then he turned back to Rowan and looked him over the way he looked at storms, measuring, not yielding. Nyx took another step forward, stopping within arm's reach of the Alpha King. Rowan held still, breath visible in the cold. Nyx lowered his head slightly, displaying the air mark clearly, deliberately, not as surrender, as demand. "Respect me." Rowan's throat worked once. Then he nodded, slow. "Agreed," he said, and it didn't sound like a king granting mercy. It sounded like a man admitting truth. But Dane wasn't done. He shifted again, anger sent in the air. "Your Majesty, this is dangerous. An Omega has influenced him." Nyx's head snapped toward Dane so fast it was a blur. Dane's hand moved, too quick, too practiced, toward the belt at his hip. Illyra's body reacted before her mind did. She shoved Nyx sideways with one hand and reached for a knife with the other. A sharp twang cut through the air. Not a horn, a crossbow. The bolt didn't hit Nyx. It hit Illyra's shoulder. Pain exploded hot and immediate, searing through layers of cloth and flesh. Illyra staggered back, shock stealing her breath. For a heartbeat, she didn't even understand what had happened. Only that her arm went numb and her fingers lost their grip on the knife.